Canada and the United States once stood as inseparable trade allies. For decades, nearly 75% of Canadian exports crossed south to the US, binding both economies together. But in 2025, that decades-old partnership is being shaken to its core. The cause? A renewed and far more aggressive tariff campaign by President Donald Trump. Unlike previous rounds, this wave touches nearly every sector. In March, Washington imposed a 25% tariff on all Canadian aluminum and steel. Within weeks, those tariffs doubled to 50%. Then came the shockwave, 25% duties on all imported cars and car parts, followed by a 10% levy on Canadian energy exports. The message from Washington was clear: economic pressure by any means. In response, Canada took a stance rarely seen in its diplomatic history.
Prime Minister Mark Carney declared during a televised visit to Washington, "The old relationship with the United States is over."
That wasn't a closed-door comment. It was broadcast for the world to see. Almost immediately, Canadian companies started shifting. A pharmaceutical firm in British Columbia began negotiations with Asian buyers. A Montreal steel supplier told American clients their prices were about to double. A costume manufacturer slashed U.S. prices to liquidate stock, uncertain if future trade would even be feasible. Others, like label pack printing, decided to pull out of the U.S. market entirely, fearing any additional tariffs could wipe out their business overnight. Across the country, one word defined the mood: unpredictability. Rather than waiting for the next round of tariff threats, Canadian policymakers moved fast. In late 2024, Ottawa finalized a sweeping economic deal with Indonesia, eliminating over 90% of tariffs on Indonesian imports and deepening cooperation in critical minerals like nickel and bauxite. It wasn't an isolated move. Backed by a $2.3 billion Indo-Pacific strategy, Canada began targeting over 40 countries across Asia and beyond. While the US was pulling out of trade alliances, Canada was building new ones. It wasn't just diversification, it was a hedge against a future where the White House could no longer be trusted. By early 2025, the global response became visible in numbers. Foreign direct investment in Canada surged over $50 billion, marking a 9% increase year over year. Meanwhile, in the United States, foreign investment plunged by 28%. Investors weren't just watching, they were reacting.
Canadian Trade Minister Mary Anna said it best: "We are creating predictability, not as a slogan, but as a strategy."
While the US toyed with a 10% tariff on Canadian oil, Canada quietly retaliated, reducing its US energy imports and striking back without fanfare. The goal wasn't revenge, it was stability. In the automotive sector, the effects were even more pronounced. Trump's 25% auto tariff triggered alarm bells. Industry analysts predicted thousands of dollars in added costs per vehicle. Ferrari preemptively hiked its US prices by 10%. Rumors began circulating that Honda might back away from its $15 billion electric vehicle investment in Ontario, not because of Canada's policies, but due to instability from the US side. US business groups from Michigan to Missouri begged Trump to reconsider. 1 in 5 jobs in Michigan is tied to auto manufacturing, and a tariff avalanche could wipe them out. But those warnings fell on deaf ears. As uncertainty deepened, companies began planning for a future beyond the US. Foxconn, a major Taiwanese electronics manufacturer, announced it had already diversified its supply chain beyond American soil. Semiconductor firms began scouting Canadian universities for new R&D hubs. Asian and European conglomerates poured billions into Canadian battery and mineral projects. All signs pointed in one direction, toward a new global trade map, where Canada, not the US, was the safer bet. Even as the initial shock of American tariffs hit Canada, the economy kept moving. By the end of 2024, Canada's GDP had grown at a 2.6% annualized rate, better than analysts had expected. Though nearly 76% of Canadian exports still flowed to the US, the trend was starting to shift. That number was gradually falling. In contrast, US exports to Canada dipped by over 1%. American farmers faced retaliatory tariffs that crushed demand for Florida oranges and Kentucky bourbon. Steel distributors in Pennsylvania saw long-held supply chains vanish. Car manufacturers scrambled to rewrite contracts, anticipating cost spikes from Canadian partners. Back in Washington, threats kept coming. Trump aides hinted at even more tariffs. One White House official even joked that Canadian companies wouldn't have to worry about trade duties if Canada became our 51st state. But Ottawa wasn't laughing. neither were investors. Neither were America's remaining trade allies. Canada, meanwhile, pressed forward, signing deals with the European Union, Japan, Australia, and India. It projected itself not just as a trading partner, but as a reliable, treaty-bound, rules-based economy. The contrast couldn't be more stark. The US was building walls, Canada was building bridges, and the global market was watching. Higher grocery bills, costlier fuel, and pricier cars in the US weren't just inflation. They were the cost of unpredictability. Canada's largest auto workers union called the tariffs economic sabotage. But the real damage wasn't just to Canadian industries. It was also hitting American companies, consumers, and workers. Canadian firms that once saw the US as a guaranteed market began opening offices in Berlin, Jakarta, and Dubai instead of Buffalo or Chicago. One Canadian executive summed up the shift with brutal honesty.
"We're telling our US clients your government has chosen to make you pay more."
Some US buyers walked away, others stayed and paid the premium. Now the question is no longer whether Canada will decouple from the United States. The question is how fast. As trade wars intensify, Canada's strategy has become crystal clear. It's not playing chicken, it's constructing a new network, a firewall of global trade partnerships designed to reduce exposure to volatility and reward stability. And in today's interconnected economy, that message is being heard loud and clear.
As Minister Mary Anna said, predictability is no longer optional, it is essential.
And unless the United States can restore that sense of stability, it may soon find itself not protected, but isolated.